and welcome everyone to the Against the Stream podcast, your weekly communist analysis of world news. My name is Hamid Alizadeh, and I'm here with Jorge Martin from the Revolutionary Communists International. Well, we have a lot of interesting things to discuss today.
Yeah.
A week is a long time in politics, as they say. We'll be discussing the events unfolding in Syria with the reignition of the civil war, if you may, the collapse of the French government, the pardoning of Hunter Biden by his dad, Joe Biden, President of the United States. And if we have time, I think we will have time, we will also comment on the events, the coup attempt that took place in South Korea on Tuesday. So, Jorge, let's start. I thought we could start with Syria, because what happened on the 27th of November was not yesterday, but the Wednesday before that. We saw, as the ceasefire was coming into motion in Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel, the Syrian rebels, or so-called rebels,
Yes.
Syrian militias, Syrian armed forces, who controlled the governorate, the northwestern governorate of Idlib, launched a surprise offensive against the western countryside of Aleppo, which is the second largest city of Syria. This offensive, I think, took everyone by surprise in its rapidity, and its success, in the sense that government forces seemed to melt away. And within 3 days, these forces had taken Aleppo, a city which was fought over years for over years during the Syrian Civil War. In a matter of 3 days, it fell. In the south, again, the rebels continued towards another major city of the country, Hama, which is the capital of the governorate of the same name. And Hama fell today, which put serious doubts about the future survival of the Syrian regime, I would say. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Now, the first thing I thought we should discuss is the word I used in the beginning, the rebels.
Who are the rebels? I wanted to say that because in all the media, I did a search the other day, and in all the media, the events are described in this way: the Syrian rebels liberate Aleppo and stuff like that. So when the bourgeois media in the West talk about Hamas or Hezbollah, they always make the point that this is a designated terrorist organization. Or Islamic fundamentalist or an Islamist organization. But these are just rebels, which in reality is a word that elicits sympathy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's rebellion.
But who are they?
Well, the governorate of Idlib is controlled by the organization called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, whose leader is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. Now, Jolani has an interesting history. Jolani was a member of the Islamic State of Iraq, the precursor to what became ISIS, the Islamic State of Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham, and later on the Islamic State. He fell out with the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq because he went back to Syria and set up another Al-Qaeda affiliate called Jabhat al-Nusra. The leader of Islamic State Baghdadi was his name, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, wanted to forcibly fuse the Syrian section of Al-Qaeda with his own section in Iraq. Under his control. Al-Jolani did not want to do that. He enjoyed his own independence. So he broke with Baghdadi and pledged allegiance to the leader of Al-Qaeda directly. Before that, you can say the Syrian section of Al-Qaeda had been a subsection of the Iraqi one. Then later on, he because he could see that there was lots of funding and money coming in from the West into Syria, into the Islamic movement, as a means to undermining the Assad regime. The Jolani developed the idea that Al-Qaeda in Syria should publicly renounce its ties to Al-Qaeda, and instead pledge them secretly, because in that way it would be, more manageable for Western politicians, or more palatable for Western politicians to support these guys. It is said that the Al-Qaeda leadership refused this request, but how can we know that? We can't really know. Yeah. It's also irrelevant from our point of view. The fact is that in all but organizational ties, these are people who have the same principles as Al-Qaeda. They are fundamentalist Islamic jihadists who actually could not have developed to the strength that they have, was it not for Western support, Western support during the Syrian Civil War. The West and the Gulf states, as well as Turkey, but mainly the West, poured in millions. The CIA had the biggest, one of the biggest, most expensive programs since Afghanistan, where they helped the Taliban come to power in the 80s. $500 million over the course of 3 years, I believe, from 2014 to 17, in order to build up these groups. And the majority of that money went to Jabhat al-Nusra. Later on, Jabhat al-Nusra, they went through a whole series of rebrandings where they talked about, they basically renounced the internationalism, i.e. the idea of spreading the revolution. Again, that would make it more palatable for Western governments who wouldn't necessarily see them as a threat. They said, no, we're just worried about Syria. We're going to stay here. And also, they took over Idlib. They crushed all opposition, essentially, except a few small groups who were designated, groups designated support, to receive support from the West. So in essence,
particularly the United States.
So in essence, what you had was a massive group that controls the whole governorate, and then small groups of a few hundred who were the only ones who were allowed to operate there, who would get anti-tank weapons and so on, arms, training, funding from the West. You also had the White Helmets, which is, they got an Oscar, I believe. Did they also get the Nobel Peace Prize? Yeah. There was a documentary about them. They got an Oscar. White Helmets, this volunteer brigades who help people who've been victims of the Assad regime. In reality, you see, there are lots of films where I saw a documentary a few years ago where they filmed a place that an old administrative office of Idlib, the Idlib governorate. And you had the offices of the White Helmet, and next to it, or in the same building or in the same office, you had Jabhat al-Nusra, you had the ISIS flag. Essentially, these were the same thing. They were never allowed to operate, were it not for the permission of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And it was a way of giving funding and control and exercising control over the movement with plausible deniability. For the West, right? Yes. So that's really what we're dealing with. This is a group could never have been developed or survived without support of the West. However, in the past few years, what's happened is that the group has come more and more under the control of Turkey. Turkey is the only country other than Syria that has a border, which means that all trade is controlled by Turkey. Turkey has military outposts throughout the whole region. In fact, at one point, the region was collapsing as a regime and Iranian and Russian forces were advancing. And the Turkish military moved in to defend them by putting up these military outposts that the Iranians then would not
incidentally, this is an illegal incursion into a sovereign country, which no one
really talks about. But Turkey is now clearly the this is now a Turkish protectorate, a Turkish colony in everything, economically, militarily, politically.
And above all, from a security point of view.
It's controlled, and without Turkey's permission, they couldn't do anything. It's also clear that this campaign has been coordinated from Turkey. There's no other way it could have been carried out. They have modern arms, they have Humvees, they have tanks, they have thousands of drones. All of this requires a certain level of industry and coordination that they couldn't have done without the Turkish participation. And if the Turks wanted to, they could have just shut the borders, and that was it.
In fact, there was a long article in the Financial Times about the military side of things, and this military expert was saying, no, it cannot be proven that HTS is directly supplied by Turkey.
Yeah.
But he said, but what happens is that there's a number of groups that are directly affiliated with Turkey. They receive weapons and funding and ammunition and tanks and stuff like that, vehicles, and then these vehicles end up in the hands of HTS, but because these two groups are allied. This is just a formal cover.
Of course.
But in reality, this is a proxy for Turkey.
Exactly. And also, I would say, I am in no doubt. I mean, there's no proof of these things, and it's very murky area. So everything is with a kind of a caution that we can't really know what's going on. But it's highly unlikely that the CIA and the Mossad would not have known about this.
Of course.
And that they didn't cynically allow it to take place because they see this as a rift between Turkey, Iran, and Russia, and as a means to weakening Iran in Syria. That's one of the big problems with U.S. imperialism and Israeli imperialism has been the fact that Iran now controls politically the whole swathe between Iran and Lebanon, i.e. Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, politically more or less
and also, of course,
allied to Iran.
Any blows against the Assad regime is also indirectly a blow against Russia. It's putting Russia under more pressure.
Exactly. But they're playing with fire. That's the problem, that they're actually leaning on these madmen, these lunatics. This is what got them to ISIS. This is what got them to Islamic State. This is the same thing that got Afghanistan into the condition that it is today with the rise of Taliban, later on the rise of Al-Qaeda. And this has been what's been ravaging Iraq. This is the method of the cynical, playing with fire that the imperialists have done for years. But it's also clear that this has a different. This was not the idea of the Americans, I don't think, or the Israelis, but of Turkey, because the Turks saw that the Russians are distracted in Syria, in particular. There's an end game opening up in the Syrian Civil War. Everyone is getting ready for
in Ukraine.
In Ukraine. Sorry about that. In Ukraine, and there's an end game nearing. The military situation is getting sharper and sharper. Trump is coming to power, and everyone knows that negotiations on the agenda, or some sort of a final solution or final outcome of this situation. The Iranians, on the other hand, have been distracted in Lebanon and in Gaza, supporting Hamas, supporting Hezbollah. They've had their own conflict with Israel, a conflict that must have had an impact on them militarily, because it's clear that Hezbollah was one of the most important defenders of the northern Syria. In fact, Hezbollah played a very important role in taking Syria, and also Hezbollah, Iraqi Shia militias, in taking Aleppo and taking the countryside of Aleppo and defending it. But in the past few years, those troops, which were very important, the veteran troops, battle-hardened, had a lot of battlefield experience in tactics and strategy and so on, they were all moved back to Lebanon. And they were replaced with people who were of a lesser caliber, and probably also didn't expect something like this would come. So Turkey has seen this situation and used it basically to push the situation. There was a stalemate, there was a dead end in the negotiations for national reconciliation in Syria. Turkey wanted to have a bigger slice of the pie, wanted to have a bigger say. Assad refused to allow the Turks to do this, and refused to come to the negotiation table. And I think Erdogan, being a charlatan and a gambler and a cynic as he is, thought, now I'm going to play my play. And the Americans, the Israelis, were basically, he leaned on the Americans and the Israelis taking a neutral stance. And allowing it to happen, allowing NATO weapons and NATO training and all of these things going to these rebels. And what we have now is an extremely unstable situation, which could potentially throw Syria right back, maybe even more into a quagmire than it was a few years ago during the Civil War.
Which will be a completely reactionary outcome. And just to go back to something you said, Turkey is a member of NATO.
Yes.
Okay, Turkey has its own policy, right? And sometimes is playing Russia against the US, and then is playing the US against Russia. Erdogan has his own interest and regional ambitions. But technically, this is a NATO country. So we have a NATO country, we're saying, that is backing and supporting reactionary Islamic fundamentalists.
Yes.
in carrying out, opening up again a civil war in a neighboring country. I mean, all talk of a rules-based order, of international law, and anything like this goes out of the window. And the Syrian Civil War, we were talking about it before, it was so, as you say, as a cynical manipulation by the United States of different actors for their own purposes.
Yeah.
So at one point, the U.S. was on two different sides of the Syrian Civil War, because the CIA was backing the Islamic fundamentalists that we just mentioned. At the same time, the Pentagon was fighting side by side with the Kurdish forces in the north and the northeast.
And those two were clashing.
And they were fighting each other as well.
Yes. Now, just to go back to the Civil War and the consequences of it, and another example of imperialist meddling in the region. Before the Syrian Civil War, I would say Syria was probably one of the, if not the most advanced society in the Middle East, in the sense that it was industrial society. Syria was actually had, through a particular series of circumstances, Syria had actually eradicated capitalism in the 70s, and which meant that they had a planned economy and had managed to develop society quite well. There was an industrialized society. Unemployment was more or less zero. Very high level of culture, very high level of education, healthcare, all of these things. That was all undermined seriously after the return of capitalism in the 90s. But nevertheless, Syria was a different beast than the rest of the region. It was on a much higher level of culture until the civil war, which started with a revolutionary wave, which then met a dead end and was hijacked by Western powers, and you saw the pouring in.
Western powers and the regional powers.
Exactly, and you saw the pouring in of money and arms to all of these jihadi sectarian groups, from the Saudis to the Turks to the Americans. And on the other side, you had obviously the Iranians and the Russians piling in behind the Assad regime.
And also the Assad regime, it was in his interest to play the sectarian card, to divide people along national lines and solidify support for himself.
In the end, that's what saved him, because people said, we'd rather have this regime than these lunatics here. But what it became was an imperialist intervention in Syria. That's what that movement really became. A Western intervention with the most barbaric consequences. You had the rise of ISIS, the rise of Jabhat al-Nusra. They say at least 500,000 people dead. No one knows the real figure of death, but
millions of refugees.
Millions of refugees. But more than that, I think the fabric of society has been undermined. I mean, I was just looking at some basic figures. GDP contracted by over 60% compared to pre-Civil War situation by 2021. I don't think it's improved very much since then. Critical infrastructure destroyed. Roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, factories. Education has been undermined. Healthcare, agriculture. You have a shortage of electricity and clean water. There's been hyperinflation. 90% of the population are living below the poverty line, which is $2 a day. The hyperinflation, by the way, is caused by a banking crisis in Lebanon, which was caused by American sanctions. And again, the American sanctions on Syria has had a profoundly destabilizing effect. 50% unemployment. And sorry, we have a lot of sounds here behind me. It's barbarism. It's barbarism. I have so many figures here. Around 11% of families have children engaged in child labor in the Alleppo area. 11% of families have children who do child labor. 80% of people around Aleppo. This is a survey from last year. There was an earthquake in Aleppo last year. But before the earthquake, 80% of the surveyed households in the Aleppo area considered their income insufficient to meet the cost of living, with the cost rising to over 95% after the earthquake. The earthquake has increased the percentage of households with a monthly income of less than 200,000 Syrian pounds, that's $20 to $30, from 39.5% before the earthquake to 51%. And it goes on and on. And the Syrian state as well has been completely undermined by this process. It's a huge part of the economy now. This old, industrial economy with a good agricultural sector, oil sector, this has been reduced completely to rubble. And you have drug trade. Captagon, which was one of the drugs used during the Civil War, has now become one of the main income sources of the government. Corruption is rife. And so there is a mood of cynicism in the region, in the country. During the Civil War, people supported the Assad regime and the Iranians and the Russians against the jihadis. But now life is so hard, is unbearably hard, that there is a very cynical, and from all the reports that I'm getting from different comrades and contacts that we have in the country, that many people don't really care. And I think that...
So that will explain the rapid advance of the fundamentalists.
Which is what we saw with the rise of ISIS in Mosul, where people had enough, and to the point that they didn't really care anymore. But it also shows that the Assad regime has been completely hollowed out. And without the direct support of military support of Iran and Russia, it couldn't survive really. But it also shows, in my opinion, the destabilizing role that U.S. imperialism has played in the Middle East. I mean, this is a proud country, and it's been reduced to rubbles, literally to rubbles, and it's become a barbaric mess. And what is it like to be a human being in Syria? What's it worth?
You were saying before that obviously we don't know. It's very difficult to ascertain the outcome of this current renewal of the conflict. But it seems to me that the fundamentalists have advanced. The HTS forces have advanced very rapidly. But it seems to me that Russia cannot afford to allow Assad to fall.
No.
And so at whatever cost, and it'll be quite a bloody battle and very costly, they will come and support him, but with all means at their disposal, I think.
Yes, I think what happened is that the Erdogan has calculated that Russia is distracted. He's going to try it on and see what happens. Russia now is rising as a world power. Russia now has the biggest battle-hardened army in the world, and it's been tested in battle against the NATO army, which de facto is what Ukraine is, against NATO arms, against NATO weapons, and so on and so forth. And it's trying to assert itself as a world power. What would it look like for a world power if it let one of its only close international allies fall? Yeah. It couldn't allow that. And therefore, yes, I think so too. I think they have 800,000 men under arms in Ukraine. They maybe need 5 or 10,000 in Syria to stabilize the situation. I think they will find that. And so will the Iranians,
And also Erdogan. I'm not sure that Erdogan's play is to take over the whole of Syria, but just to weaken the regime enough so that he can carve up a bigger slice of the north, and also to push out the Kurdish forces that control the northeast.
But what he would also do, he would have the industrial center of the country, which would give him probably an upper hand. He could actually come out stronger than the Assad regime now. Now, the last point I thought we should discuss in all of this is precisely what we have here, because we have Russia and Iran lining up behind the Assad regime. China has come out with support to the Assad regime. Then, on the other hand, you have Israel and the U.S. tacitly basically supporting the rebels. The Americans are covering for a Kurdish assault on a series of Syrian regime-held villages. You were saying that Israel stopped a flight basically from Iran to Damascus, which would probably bring logistics with shipments of arms and funds and so on to Syria. So in essence, what we have is the outlines of another, another conflict, where the outlines of the two kind of rising imperialist blocs internationally revealing themselves. And the other thing is that this is also a consequence of the war in Lebanon and Gaza. Yes. The Israeli onslaught on Gaza and the American support for it has destabilized the situation in the region. Yes. And this shows what's possible, what's coming. That this whole thing could unravel. We don't know whether that will happen or not, but this has the potential to unravel. And everywhere where it unravels, you see these two blocks lining up. But you also see the other consequence of this situation is that a country like Turkey, who's a NATO member, who long has been playing along with Russia, who has been sabotaging Sweden and Finland's ascension into, entrance into NATO, and has gas deals and oil deals with Russia, has tourists, all sorts of economic deals with each other. And they had a deal about Syria and they had a deal about the Middle East. They agreed to push out the Americans. But now Turkey is seeing, well, I'm going to lean on the other bloc, leaning on the American tacit support or CIA support, direct support, whatever is going on. Clearly, he's now leaning on the other side to push his luck with these guys. And, lots of people have talked about a multipolar world, i.e. different imperialist democracies, so to say. More imperialist powers being allowed to make a say would make the world safer and more stable.
More peaceful and more just.
Which
is the opposite.
But what we see here is the exact opposite.
And can I maybe add that I think that this can be politically very damaging for Erdogan, because Erdogan's been playing this game of saying, no, I support the Palestinian people, I support the Lebanese people, I'm against Israel, while at the same time maintaining trade, supply of oil and so on for Israel, which depends heavily on Turkish supplies and trade. And now he's seen as supporting the friends of Israel and the enemies of the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people. This can have further political consequences at home, I think.
Absolutely. In the end, I think the main thing is we see that the essence of capitalism, narrow individual interest above the interests of the mass of humanity, and you see the result is absolute barbarism, and it shows that this is a class unfit to rule, so to say, and it's yet another example of that.
And if you want to go even further back, I mean, all this region, because of its oil wealth, has always been and its geostrategic position, which is very crucial for world trading routes and so on. Has always been subject to imperialist machinations, and this goes back to the Sykes-Picot Treaty, if you want, 1916, the division of Syria and Lebanon, the creation of artificial countries, carefully balanced
by French and British imperialism.
French imperialism, but carefully balanced between different national and ethnic religious groups, so that imperialism will continue to dominate.
Exactly, and you see the result of that, because they, as you say, the architects of this plan made sure that every country, a state, had lots of different nations and sects, and that they could play out against one another. In Palestine, they placed the Palestinians and the Jews. In Lebanon, you had all sorts of different religious sects. In Syria, you have the Shias, the Sunnis, the Druze, the Alawites, the Christians, and so on and so forth.
And then the Kurdish, divided amongst many different
the Kurds
countries.
In Iraq, you have the Kurds, the Shias, the Sunnis. This is the game they played, and the region is divide and rule, and that's what everyone is paying a price for. Okay, I think we'll definitely come back to this, but let's continue now. The next topic is France. Again, rapid, sharp turn of events. Do you want to give us a...
Yes, we discussed this last week, and the summary of the situation is one where in July last year, Macron was in a weak position coming out of the European elections in France, and decided to call new elections. The new election, in order to strengthen his position in Parliament, instead of strengthening his position, because of his extreme unpopularity of his policies of austerity, attacks on the working class, attacks on pension rights, and so on, his party was even further weakened. And what we had is the collapse of the center and the strengthening of the extremes, i.e. the extreme left, represented by the New Popular Front, and the extreme right, represented by Le Pen's party, the National Rally. And this made it extremely difficult to form a stable bourgeois government, which is necessary in France from the point of view of the ruling class to carry out these austerity measures. Macron it took him 2 months to form a government. When a government was finally formed, it was like a Frankenstein government composed of different bits and pieces. It was a government of Macron, let's say the liberal party of Macron and his allies, and then the traditional right-wing bourgeois conservative party of Barnier, who became the prime minister. This was the government, and then it had outside support. They were not part of the government, but supported this government with a parliamentary majority, the national rally of Le Pen, the far right. And but the problem was that this government, which was a very unstable, fragile government, was forced then to carry out massive austerity program. French capitalism is not in an open recession, but the economic growth is very slow. It's gone down to 1%. Mm-hmm. On top of this, you have the increased energy prices as a result of the war in Ukraine and the sanctions on Russia imposed on Europe. You had a whole number of factors that created a massive budget deficit. The budget deficit in France is now 6.1% of GDP, when the Maastricht criteria, the criteria for the European Economic Union, is 3% of GDP. So that's more than double. Barnier went to the National Assembly with a plan to reduce that by 1 percentage point, from 6 to 5%. And this was a package of 40 billion euros worth of cuts, social cuts in social spending, austerity, and so on, and 20 billion additional in tax rises. Now the government says these tax rises were for the rich, but this is not even true, because, for instance, one of the tax increases they implemented was on the electricity bills, which are paid by the ordinary public, the working class people. So anyway, this 60 billion package worth of cuts, austerity reduction, deficit reduction, did not find a parliamentary majority. Why did the far right National Front, National Rally not support this budget? Because what was becoming increasingly clear is that the only opposition to this government was the left, i.e. the New Popular Front, around Mélenchon and other parties.
25% of National Rally voters believed that the left was the real opposition.
Yes, so that was completely discrediting Le Pen, who's obviously looking forward to the presidential elections, and she wants to be the next president of France. So that was from point of view of political calculation. But she's very clever in the way that she's presented the thing, because she said to Barnier, she said, you need to implement 3 measures in order for us to vote this budget. 1, no increased taxes on the electricity bills. Number 2, no delay in the automatic recalculation of pensions, i.e. no cuts in pensions. And another measure, which I can't even remember.
Was it the indexing of pensions, you mean?
Yeah, the indexing of pensions, which is automatic. The government wants to delay. So instead of being indexed in January, it will be a few months later, because the pensioners will lose out. So she was very cleverly using this, which was an excuse, try to find a justification that will make her look like she's the defender of the interest of working class people and so on.
Very Trumpian.
Yes. So then was it on Monday? There was the first of 3 votes for this budget. The Social Security budget was put to the vote on Monday, didn't have a majority. Then the government of Barnier decided to use decree powers, bypassing Parliament, where they didn't have a majority, using the Article 49.3 of the Constitution, which allows the government to rule by decree on certain issues and bypass Parliament. So this is not democratic at all. And but in using this article allows then the opposition to present a vote of no confidence, which was presented by the New Popular Front, the left kind of coalition. This was voted yesterday, Wednesday, with a big majority. The far right voted for it. And then the government immediately falls if it loses a vote of no confidence. Today, Barnier went to Macron, and this afternoon, Macron accepted his resignation. Now the fun starts, if you want to put it this way, because this social and economic crisis has now become a major political crisis. And what the French bourgeois newspapers are saying is that this can become then an institutional crisis because all the institutions are completely discredited.
Yeah.
And the question now remains to see is what's next? What are the options left for Macron and the ruling class? Not many, because it's very difficult, nigh impossible, to form a new parliament, a stable parliamentary majority, prepared to pass the measures that are necessary for capitalism.
Yeah.
Because any parties that form part of such a coalition implementing these measures will become extremely unpopular.
Yeah.
So whatever happens, they might form a government, they might not form a government, they might have a caretaker government or a technocratic government. Because the other thing is that they cannot call for early parliamentary elections
until July.
Because they already had elections July this year. So it was 1 year more.
Yeah.
So this also means that all eyes are now concentrated also on the question of Macron. Macron is responsible for this. He cobbled together this government. He is in favor of these policies. He will address the country in a few hours. And now the obvious next step is that he should resign and there should be presidential elections.
Yeah. We'll get back to this point. I thought maybe one of the points that you mentioned in the beginning is the background to all of this, the economic situation. Because lots of people talk about politics as if it's in the bourgeois press. They talk about it as if it's just they should do this and they should do that, like it's a choice, basically. But we can see here that there is an economic basis to everything that's going on, which is really the decline of French capitalism over many years. Now, in Deutsche Welle, there was a very interesting article called "Is France Heading for an Economic Storm?" I just highlighted a few things. Here is a quote from someone called Denis Ferrand, head of Paris-based Economic Research Institute Rexecode. I don't know about who these guys are, but he says, this is interesting, he says, French and European companies have become less competitive with Chinese ones, as our production costs have risen by 25% since 2019. They only went up by 3% in China over the same period. That's quite interesting, isn't it? That shows where all of this is coming from. And then there's high inflation, rising interest rates, soaring energy prices. All of these things have led to a situation where there's no investments coming on, basically. And it says, this is a result. It says, we do a quarterly survey amongst 1,000 bosses of 1,000 French small and medium-sized companies about their investment behavior. In October, only 36% of them were planning to maintain their investments, with 45% saying they'd postpone them and 18% wanting to cancel them. And they have another survey again, which shows that there's no investments taking place, essentially. About 65,000 companies are expected to file for insolvency this year, compared to 56,000 last year. So that's an almost 20% increase.
When, by the way, when the ruling class or market analysts say political stability is needed for investment, what they mean is we want a strong capitalist government able to carry out cuts against the working class and their conditions, so that we can make more profits, and therefore then we will invest. That's exactly what they mean.
Then it goes on and says, many companies now have to pay back loans that the government handed out during the COVID-19 epidemic. But there are also structural reasons, such as the transition to electronic cars and so on and so forth. But I wanted to hold on to this debt question, because this is the crucial question here. You see, the bourgeois, since 2008, even before that, since the late 90s, every time there's been a sign of a crisis, which is a cyclical thing that inherently exists within capitalism, have overcome the worst of those crises by what? By taking up huge amounts of debts. And that's what we have now in the state budget. You have, they say interest rates alone in 2025 should reach 55 billion euros. then 70 billion in 2027, 100 billion in 2028.
Incidentally, 55 billion euros is almost the same amount that they're cutting from the budget now. So basically they're saying we're taking this money away.
Just to pay interest rates.
This money away from you working people just to pay the interest to the banks.
Yeah. And just for comparison, according to the national education budget this year was 65 billion euros. So that's the one side of it, that all of this, basically the states saved capitalism. The states intervened, capitalist states intervened to save the system.
Class pay for it.
Now they're making the working class pay. But on the other hand, the companies who are also massively indebted and who were totally dependent on cheap credits, i.e. low interest rates, in a situation where they're going up, are seeing that they can't pay them. You know, and this goes back to one of the things that we said. We said, yes, with credit you can artificially expand the market temporarily, but as I think Alan Woods, our comrade's main theoretician of the RCI, has said many times, debts have to be paid back with an interest at some point. At some point in the future.
That point has come now.
That point has come. They've been pushing this mountain ahead of them, basically overcoming every crisis with a mountain of debt, and now the time has come
demanding payment.
For the demanding payment. And I would say one other thing, which is we have a very good article that we're going to put up on marxist.com in the next days or maybe early next week by a comic called Jérôme Metellus from France. It already is in French. It's called The Causes and Consequences of the Decline of French Capitalism. It's in French on the website of the French comrades. People can read it with Google Translate. Or they can wait for a proper translation to come on marxist.com. But I think he makes a lot of very, very interesting points. And one of the things he said, first of all, he talks about how in the past years they really undermined the conditions of work and wages, essentially. So the labor unit cost, i.e. the cost that capitalists have to pay to get a worker, is now on the same level as Germany, which before that was much, much lower than France. In essence, they have really squeezed the French working class.
They've destroyed many of the gains that the French working class made over many decades.
Yes. But then it says, however, this has not resulted in more investments. The profits come from this has not gone into more investments into industry, into production, into science, technology, and so on. He says, instead, what has come out of is orgies of dividends and speculative investments. He says, for a good number of years, the French bourgeoisie has been the European champion of dividends, which is distributed to the tune of tens of billions each year. The same observation can be made regarding the tax exemptions and subsidies of all kinds that the French big business benefits from. More than 150 billion euros per year. All of this public money is given to big business under the pretext of stimulating employment and investment. But no, this money mostly ends up in the pockets of shareholders and flies away in tax fraud, which officially amounts to between 60 and 80 billion euros per year. These figures highlight the increasing parasitic nature of French capitalism. It is completely addicted to public subsidies, which are one of the fundamental causes of the growing public debt.
What this tells you is that capitalism, in this case, French capitalism particularly, is completely, the reason why they don't invest is because people, they don't have the money to buy these things because their conditions have been attacked. So it's like a negative spiral, and because they don't invest, there's no competitive enough.
And at the same time, if you have a buddy in the state who just prints money and gives them to you, why go through the risk and the trouble of finding investments and investing in factories and this and that you never know how much are they gonna? It's a lot easier just to fiddle with the system and just siphon money out of the state. In essence, say all of this debt, this mountain of debt, has accelerated. How do you say, the decay of the system in a way, and is undermining it by the day. And that's really what got us here.
And this has created what we were discussing last week, a bloodbath of job losses.
Yes.
I think it's over 150,000 job losses were announced just in the month of October.
Mm-hmm.
This means tens of thousands of workers in industry, in retail, in other sectors, losing their jobs. This is the social and economic crisis which has led to this political crisis.
Precisely. Now there's the other side of this, which is, in my notes, I've highlighted this part in the Deutsche Welle article, and I've written the voice of the markets. I'll read it out for you. It says, Anne-Sophie Asliff, chief economist at Paris-based consultancy BDO, says that these factors on their own wouldn't make for a dramatic economic situation. The political factor, however, does. It says, our macroeconomic figures were about to improve, but if the government falls now and no tailor-made 2025 budget gets voted through parliament, we'll be sliding into an economic crisis. It would be catastrophic. We would signal to investors that our country is incapable of implementing a deficit reduction plan. If the government gets voted out, she said, the 2024 budget will likely be replicated in 2025. But that was the budget that increased our deficit to over 6%. Macron's decision to dissolve parliament was a monumental mistake. We're now forced to govern our country through coalitions, but we're incapable of that and thus facing an extremely unstable political situation.
Macron's disbanding of the parliament and calling for elections might have been a massive miscalculation, but before that he was already extremely unpopular and he didn't have a majority.
And the government would have followed.
Remember
anyway.
that Macron had to use decree powers, the 49.3 article, in order to pass the counter reform of pensions in 2023.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is this: the markets are now demanding that France pays debts, otherwise they're gonna downgrade France's credit rating. Debts interest rates are gonna go even higher than they are now. That's already happening. There's like a sliding exponential scale.
The markets, when they say the markets, it means the capitalists, the bankers, speculators. Stock market, gamblers.
And they're in fact blackmailing the country, blackmailing the government, and they don't like what they see. They don't like the instability.
Yes.
They also downgraded because there's no proper government. In essence, they are the ones piling on the pressure.
Which, by the way, makes a mockery of bourgeois democracy. We know bourgeois democracy is a farce, but this reveals it openly because who rules the country? The people through their votes, through the elected representatives? No, it's the markets through the pressure on the elected representatives.
Yes, exactly. Now, obviously, this creates a situation where the economy is in a total turmoil, and under capitalism, there's only one group that can pay for this. That's the working class. The struggle really is, who is going to make the workers pay? Who's gonna blacken their own name? Who's gonna destroy themselves politically in order to take this bill and put it in front of the workers? And no one wants to do that. Obviously, it's political suicide. That's what it really is.
But one of the solutions that they're proposing, if I can just go into that point, they are talking. There's a lot of talk about a new government. What kind of configuration of a new government could have? And people from the Socialist Party, from the Greens, and from Macron's own party have said the only solution, and a lot of people have been talking about this in the last 24 hours, the only solution is a government that goes from the Communist Party all the way to the Republicans. The Republicans is the Conservative Party of Barnier. The Communist Party is a party that is not communist at all, but is part of Mélenchon's coalition. And so that will mean a government of what they call the Republican arc, the Republican front, i.e. all those who are for the Republic. Apparently, if you are for higher pensions, for wages and so on, you're not for the Republic, apparently. So the government that will leave out only Le Pen and her National Rally, and Mélenchon and his La France Insoumise. But this also means, incidentally, that will mean the breaking of the new Popular Front. And we warned at the time of the elections the new Popular Front was a mistake, because La France Insoumise of Mélenchon had the attractive of appearing as the most radical left alternative to the establishment.
Yeah.
But then, in order to increase the parliamentary arithmetic, in a complete miscalculation, they brought in the Socialist Party, which was already an incredibly discredited party. They had carried out austerity measures.
Yeah.
The Communist Party, which stands to the right of Mélenchon on every single issue and closer to the socialist neoliberals. And the Greens. Had Mélenchon stood on his own, he might not have gotten such a big majority, but Mélenchon does not need all these parties. These parties, on the contrary, need the authority
they
and prestige of Mélenchon. They only have these seats because of that. Yeah. Not only this, but then in the second round of the parliamentary elections in July, August, the New Popular Front agreed to stand down in favor of the election of a whole number of Macron supporters. And then Macron decided not to allow the New Popular Front, which had won the biggest group in parliament, to form government. Yeah. So all these tactics and calculations are all wrong and actually weaken the hand of the left, which in reality what it should be saying is this cannot be resolved in parliament. It needs to be resolved on the streets through strikes, mass demonstrations, the self-activity of the working class. And what happens is that if any of these parts of the left get embroiled or tarnished by participating in a new government, who's going to benefit from this? The far right.
The far right, yeah, exactly.
And then there'll be all cries, the rise of the far right. And
on this question of the class struggle and the awkward position it puts the French political establishment in. The Economist has written an article. I think you also have it there. I have it here. And one of the things that they say, there's lots of interesting things here. The article is called France's Parliament Fires the Prime Minister. I think they changed the name of this article once, but anyway. Says the underlying problem is that most French voters are unwilling to face economic reality. Like other aging European countries facing competition from America and Asia, France is spending unsustainably. And then it goes through all of the things that France should not do, i.e. spend money on unsustainably social
like healthcare, pensions, education.
Things that would make life worth living. And then it says, it's hard, then further down it says, it's hard to see how this can be resolved until voters rediscover the merits of frugality. You need to be frugal, you see. But voters, not big business, needs to be frugal. Until voters rediscover the merits of frugality, they will go on voting for the fantasies peddled by the extremes. Sensible, i.e. painful budgets will not be passed. Economic growth would make all that easier, but France is growing by barely 1% a year.
This is actually an argument against democracy. The people cannot be trusted to vote what we, the capitalists, need.
Yes, exactly. And that's what they've been trying to,
for many years.
One of the comrades, Jack Hilinski, we just had a meeting, and he made a very interesting point. He said one of the things that the Financial Times has been talking about was having there's apparently an Article 16 in the Constitution, which allows for the president to push through a budget law by decree. And he could not be toppled, apparently, as far as I understand. What we see is that the old institutions that the system built up as a cover, the democratic institutions which were built up as a cover for the dictatorship of capital, no longer serve their purpose. And now what you really need... They're completely discredited, and they don't function. They don't work. The ruling class cannot rule in the way that it used to. And therefore they have to rule by direct intervention, by decree.
Which is completely undemocratic.
Which is the truth of how this situation...
Revealing the real truth. The editorial in Le Monde today talks about a deep mistrust. There is a real risk that the political crisis will degenerate into an institutional crisis, given the high level of mistrust, not only of the president, but also of parliamentarians who are collectively accused of impotence.
Yes. This is the situation that the bourgeois find them in everywhere.
Yes. This is what the Financial Times is saying. This is not just
the
France.
Economist, you mean?
Sorry?
The Economist.
The Economist is saying it's not just France, it's the whole of Europe.
Yes.
And we've just seen the collapse of the government in Germany.
Let's read it. This is another very, very good quote from there. They say, unfortunately, Europe's governing politicians are unable to generate a consensus on how to pay for existing and future spending. Across Europe, political fragmentation is leading to unstable government, either because it creates scrappy coalitions, as in Germany or the Netherlands, or minority governments like France's or Spain's. Their weakness infects the EU as a whole because without leadership from France and Germany, nothing ambitious can happen in Brussels. In the past, voters' discontent would have led to a healthy change of government. This is very interesting. However, France is also a stark warning of where the politics of disappointment leads today. When voters have tired of centrist coalitions or weak minority governments, the only other choice before them is the political extremes. Mm-hmm. I think this is...
and France is a good example of this because the collapse of the centers led to the strengthening of the extremes, both the far right, but also in this case, the far left.
Yes.
I mean, Mélenchon is not a communist, he's not a Marxist, and he's never actually even said that he's against the capitalist system, but he represents certain policies that cannot be implemented within the limits of capitalist crisis.
Yes.
That's the problem for the ruling class.
Exactly. But also what we see here, I think this is what I've been thinking about lately, is there's a general trend here. On the one hand, you have a massive crisis of capitalism, which require the capitalist class to make deep cuts into living standards, in particular in the West. Mm-hmm. On the other hand...
And for that, they need a strong government.
They need a strong government. On the other hand, the working class has never been stronger, bigger, more powerful, and will not accept it. And that's one of the reasons why they've kept this credit boom going, because they know that if they stop it, if there's a crisis, they could stand with they could suddenly be, end up with a revolution in their hands or a big revolt. In the past, they had, as you say, strong governments. Here they say, there would have been a healthy change of government. We know what that means. In France, it means you had the Socialist Party, then you had the Republicans, and it would be the right hand and the left hand of the capitalist class, essentially. In Britain, you had the Labour Party leadership, acted as the agents of the bourgeois, maintaining order when people were discontented with the Tories. Then when Labour was discredited, you would have the Tories coming back in.
The problem, particularly in France, is that this system has been completely discredited. Yes. The traditional Conservative Party is Barnier's party, which got 7% of the vote in the recent election, in the July elections. And the Socialist Party was completely destroyed by implementing austerity policies in power. At one point, the thing, was it under Hollande? I can't even remember. A few years ago, the Socialist Party got 2.5% of the vote. They have no serious, trustworthy replacement for the collapse of this government.
And the same in the US. You see the Democratic Party completely discredited. I read an article in the Economist about a year ago. It talked about replacing Joe Biden, and they went through a long list of people, and they just came to the conclusion that there was no one. This was before Kamala Harris became.
And meanwhile, the Republican Party is in the hands of.
It's no longer the Republican Party is also discredited. You just have the Trump Party. That's what you have, which is a kind of a anti-establishment outsider. The party, right? And the same we see everywhere, and this obviously...
But this goes back to something that Alan Woods has been saying now for some years. He says, any attempt to restore the economic equilibrium will destroy the political equilibrium, and vice versa.
Because at the bottom of all of this is the deep and insoluble capitalist crisis. And
because the other thing that we were talking this morning is that the other way to bring down the budget deficit would be to have economic growth. You have economic growth, there's more tax revenue and so on, but there's not going to be any economic growth in France for the foreseeable future. France is growing now at 1%, which is very good for European standards today. I mean, Germany is in recession, but
growth would mean massive investments in industry, massive investments in technology and research over decades, actually. But what we have in the whole of the Western sphere, you can say, Western imperialism, is in all countries. I remember we talked about Spain a few weeks ago, the Spanish economy, the German economy, the French economy. There's been decades now where no investments have taken place. In fact, they did invest a certain amount in the 70s and 80s, maybe. Germany a bit later. And they did industrialize and had relatively advanced industries. But that's been gone now. This bubble, this huge bubble of speculation and, just cheap credit.
In the meantime, the stock exchange keeps going up.
Exactly. Why bother investing in industry which gives you 10-20% returns when you can go during COVID, invest in the stock exchange and double your wealth?
Yeah, and this crisis in France is not a new thing. It's now reached a certain peak. But we've seen it over the last 10, 15 years. We've seen massive general strikes, massive movements of the youth. We've seen the yellow vests movement. Enormous discontent accumulating in society, which doesn't find any expression, and this is what really hollowed out all the bourgeois institutions.
And the point is, obviously, what's the solution? Because you have this France is an advanced country. It's an advanced society with a high level of culture, high level of industry, high level of everything. Traditionally, at least, now it's been undermined. But now what's happening is that it's crumbling, it's decaying, and the weight of all of this is going to be put on the shoulders of the working class. And I think slogans as in the nationalization of the commanding heights of the industries is now very much very relevant to struggles that might erupt in the next period.
In fact, the left wing of the CGT, the main trade union confederation, there's a left wing current that's developed over the last couple of years, which is called Unité CGT. They have put forward a program that includes the nationalization of the main industries under the control of the workers. And this is the program that is needed.
That's what you need. Yeah. First of all, a complete
no partial solutions.
A complete denunciation of all of the bourgeois parties, the refusal to work with them, the mobilization on the streets, bringing all of the brewing struggles together. There's lots of strikes and strike movements going on, mass dissatisfaction, and with a radical program of economic expropriation of all of these thieves and crooks who are laughing all the way to the bank, or rather they're sitting in there probably, and a socialist revolution in essence. Okay, do you have anything else to add?
No.
I think that's a good.
We will continue to follow events in France and Germany and elsewhere.
We will definitely come back to this because this is not over yet. The next point that I thought would be interesting to discuss is, well, Joe Biden has pardoned his son, who's called Hunter Biden. For those,
quite a wide-ranging pardon.
Yes. So let's just start with first of all, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, has been accused of a whole series of scandals, instances of corruption. In 2015, he was just out of college, and he became an oil consultant for a company called Burisma in Ukraine, where he got $1 million yearly wage. He had no connections to Ukraine. He had no connections to the oil industry. No one knows what he was actually doing. It's clear that this was payoff for some deals, and it's been quite evidently clear. This is something that Trump and the Republicans has used, that he was involved in very shady, corrupt dealings with the Ukrainians, using his father as a bargaining chip. And there's a whole series of other things. His connections to Russian companies. He's been indicted of charges of fraud because he has apparently. So he applied to get an arms license, and in it he wrote that he did not take drugs. You have to say, but at that time, which is now a public fact from his biography, he was heavily addicted to crack cocaine. This is the type of people we're dealing with. This is a crack addict who was sitting on a whole series of boards in Ukraine and Eastern Europe and receiving money from Russian oligarchs and getting an arms license. And Joe Biden always, and obviously there's a court cases against him which could put him in prison for many years. Joe Biden has said for a long time he would not pardon his son. And suddenly
because that will be abusing the office of
the office would be undemocratic, to interfere in the the workings of the state. And yet on Sunday he came out and gave what is, as far as I see, probably the most sweeping pardon in U.S. history. People say decades, but in reality, it's in ever, because the pardon says that any crimes that Hunter Biden may have committed, known or unknown, in any sphere of the law,
in the past or in the future.
Well, it doesn't say in the future, but it says
yeah.
from 2011 to today,
yes.
right? So that's how many years? 13 years.
Yes.
He's pardoned for. And this unprecedented.
What they actually saying is there's probably more he's not been tried for yet.
Of course. Now, there's obviously lots to dig into, but here's the interesting thing. First of all, these are the liberals. Joe Biden. Oh, he's such a good man. He's definitely not, the Democrats are definitely not like the Republicans, and definitely not like Trump. He's a lumpen, and he's a reactionary, and he's right. But here you have Joe Biden blatantly interfering in the legal system in order to save his crack addict son. Let's say that as it is. That's what it is. And what happened?
I think that even some Democrats are not very happy. Not very happy.
No.
They're not. It's not that they're not happy at the decision. They're not happy at how it looks, how it makes them look.
That's the point. Because what does it look like?
Yeah.
It looks like the way things are.
Yes.
It's actually revealing the truth in that the law applies to some people. Was it again? Alan was always quotes
Solon of Athens. Isn't
yes.
It? The law is like a spider's web. The small get caught in it, and the big tear it with facility.
Tear it apart. Yeah. Yes, exactly. The law does not apply to the rich. The law does not apply to Biden, who is a representative of the American ruling, of the dominant wing of the American ruling class, who are the law. That's what they believe in. They don't stand above the law. They are the law. They use it against Trump.
Yes.
They use the drag him to court. I'm sure he's done everything they accuse him for. But
all sorts of court cases and blah, blah, and obviously the Democrats are not like that. We are clean and we are legal and law abiding.
Exactly. And the same we talked about last week about the rules-based order not applying to America because America is the rules-based order.
Yes.
And just like that, inside of the U.S., these gent ladies and these clean and democracy abiding, law abiding, and pure.
Yeah, but can I just say that even if you compare these two cases, like when they are breaking this so-called international law, they are defending the fundamental interests of U.S. imperialism here, there, or somewhere.
Yeah.
When Biden is pardoning his son, whose interest is he defending? Not the interest of the U.S. ruling class, but his own personal, private interest, which
that's
makes it more scandalous.
I think the fact is Biden is old. I mean, that's the one thing he is. You can't deny that. And he's not going to continue any office. He's finished. And he's just doing whatever he likes. He doesn't care anymore. And he's just going to protect
it's not going to affect him.
He's going to protect his son, but I think also himself.
Yeah.
Someone made the point that,
obviously, many of the crimes that his son is accused of couldn't have happened without his participation.
There's lots of emails that have surfaced where he talks about the big guy and how he's talking with the big guy referring to his dad, who was vice president and then later on the president. Yes, so this brings out the and then you have obviously the other side of it, which is lots of Democrats and other people who are complaining. Because what does this look like? This is they don't care about this. They manipulate the law for their own benefit every single day. But the blatant way that this is done, it completely undermines everything they've been saying about Trump, about the abuse of power, about what do you call it? Anyway, abuse of power and corruption and so on, and just shows the liberals for what they are, which is. The worst war criminals, the rulers of America and the world, the exploiters and oppressors of many people.
On top of this, they're corrupt and twisting the law in their own benefit.
Precisely. So much for Western democracy. Now, the last bit that I thought we should talk about is South Korea.
Yes.
This must be one of the most bizarre events of the past few.
Yes.
Although there's plenty of bizarre events.
Yes, but I mean, this all happened very quickly. Obviously, this president Yoon declared martial law. When was it? Monday evening. Our time. And
Tuesday, I think.
Tuesday evening our time, and declared martial law. And then Parliament no one supported this martial law, not even his own party, right? Yes. So then the members of Parliament broke into Parliament, breaking through police and army protection. There were people on the streets fighting to get in, and once they got in, they had a vote, including his own party and the main opposition party, and they repealed martial law.
Yes.
So this all lasted just a few hours, I think 6 or 8 hours. You might think this guy is mad, and he is a little bit desperate, isn't he? Because he'd lost all his popularity. I think his popularity rating was down to 7%.
Yes.
He was being accused of a whole number of things that he could be put on trial for. He just wanted to hang on to power, right? Mm-hmm. He wanted to hold on to power when he had no basis for it anymore. This is part of the crisis of capitalism. We've seen the discrediting of the institutions and so on. And he took this completely desperate measure. I think that one thing that many people don't realize is that in the actual martial law decree, there's 2 references to strike activity. One is that all strikes are banned, but specifically the hospital workers' strike,
which has been going on for
months. For months. The workers were instructed to go back to work as part of the martial law decree, which is unheard of, unprecedented. And of course, this is a president that has the backing of the United States. The United States probably didn't know he was going to do this and kind of distanced themselves from him. But this is a bourgeois. I mean, imagine if Hugo Chavez had done anything like this. But no, this is a bourgeois Democrat, in inverted commas. Carrera was defeated. But now this has opened the floodgates for class struggle.
Yes.
What many people haven't realized is that the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, on the night of the events, already had a national meeting of the leadership, and they declared an all-out indefinite strike starting as of yesterday.
Yes.
Right? I have a report today, an updated report from the KCTU. Mm-hmm. And they say that the Railway Workers Union and the Metal Workers Union have begun their strike today, 5th of December. Tomorrow, school non-regular workers, I think they mean the non-teaching staff, will also join. And other unions will continue to join in. There's different affiliates and regions of the KCTU that are joining the strike. And there's going to be a massive people's rally on Saturday, December the 7th. And what are they demanding? They're demanding basically the defense of democratic rights, including the right to strike, but also, and above all, the impeachment or the resignation of the president. The problem is, from the point of view of the president, is that according to South Korean law, what he's done is rebellion, is an uprising against the state, an illegal uprising
punishable by death.
Punishable by death. So he's not likely to go, is he? So.
And there's another one of the comrades just before the show explained the situation. There's another element here, is that the bourgeois obviously want to maintain the semblance of bourgeois democracy. They want constitutional law to be upheld so that in front of the masses they can say, look, it all works, and there's checks and balances and so on. However, they don't have enough votes in parliament to impeach this guy. They need 8 people from his party to vote for it. Yeah. Now, that's possible because most of the people from his party, I think, realize that they can't really line up behind him. However, in order for this to go through, the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court, needs to, approve it. But they need 7 members to have quorum. 6 out of 7 members must vote for it. However, at the moment, there are only 6 judges active, which means they don't have quorum to impeach him. So here's the situation, that the liberals are putting all of their efforts behind getting this through in a legal way.
To find a constitutional solution.
The masses, in other words, on the other side, want him impeached as soon as possible. And the more the liberals are dragging their feet, it's revealing them. It's exposing them, and they're losing support. And in the meantime, you have a general strike. And I just want potential developing general strike. And I would say, just add one.
And also, one comrades in South Korea were reporting that it's not just the people who were outside parliament trying to break in and allow the members of parliament to go in. That these were not big crowds, maybe a few thousand, but the people came out on the streets in other parts of Seoul in order to try to stop the armored vehicles, stop the soldiers, and so there's a developing mass movement.
Exactly. That's why the how do you say, military convoys couldn't get through. And that's, if anything, a mass intervention into politics.
Yes.
And the other thing is, South Korea I've always admired South Korea because it's such an advanced economy. You have some of the biggest and most advanced factories and industrial complexes. The Hyundai, someone told me the Hyundai factory there, the Hyundai shipyard, has hundreds of thousands of workers. And you have Hyundai on one side of the river, Mitsubishi, you have all of these different, these are the most advanced shipyards in the world, i.e. the productivity of labor is immense. And the working class is huge, huddled up in these towns. These are factories, are towns essentially. People live there. They have their dorms and their houses and shops and everything. They don't even exit the plants. Then you have Samsung and the electronic companies, the chip industry. This is a very advanced economy, very important
with
for the world economy.
With a very powerful working class.
A very powerful working class, and also this is where a lot of the U.S. ships, in fact, are being serviced because U.S. shipyards have declined and decomposed in many ways. Very powerful working class, and the potential within this is extreme. And it shows, one, the enormous tensions underneath the surface, but also how sudden and sharp events can bring out the class question everywhere. That you can have normal times where you wouldn't see that, for ordinary people, their class interests as opposed to those of the rich and the liberals, and it wouldn't really be visible. But as soon as society is put to a sharp test, you see an immediate division beginning to arise. On the one hand, you have the whole political establishment scrambling to save their own asses. That's what and everyone can see it. Everyone see the jostling and the maneuvering, and on the other hand, you have the working class who demands justice and who demands what they were told, that they have rights, democratic rights, and have a say in the running of society. And they don't want to go back to military law. They don't want to go back to dictatorships. And so,
of which they have a long experience.
They have a long experience, yes. And we'll see how this could have unforeseen consequences relation to North Korea. This is also the parties who have been railing against the North, who've been drumming up war propaganda.
And these are the people, the South Korean members of parliament. I'm not sure if from the ruling party or from the other, I can't even remember.
They're the sources.
They are the source, the only real source of this so-called North Korean soldiers deployment into the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, the very good, invisible North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. And so obviously, it's not just these guys are going to be discredited, but the whole system and their ideas, i.e. their animosity towards the North. But we'll see if that develops or not, could or could not. But
what we said yesterday, just to finish, is in the article that we published on marxist.com about the events in South Korea, is that in reality what is required is not just that the workers exercise their industrial muscle, but that they give themselves a political voice. The KCTU has promised or has discussed for a period of time the setting up of a workers' party, of a labor party representing the interests of working people. And this is now more relevant than ever, more necessary than ever.
Exactly. And I think that's a roundup of today's news. But as the final point, just to go back to what we said at the beginning, a week is a long time in politics. But I think also the events of this week, we could never have predicted them 1 week ago. Maybe the situation in France could have been predicted, but besides that, it's these are entirely unpredictable. but they do reveal the enormous tensions that exist in the system all over the world. World capitalism, in particular Western capitalism, is in a deep, deep crisis. There's economic crisis that's spilled over into a social and political crisis. There's a diplomatic crisis. There's a military crisis.
World relations.
In world relations, a crisis of realignment. Tectonic plates are shifting across the board in every single field. And in all of this, what you see is the preparation of great class struggles which are to come, and the opening of a crisis of the system as a whole, and a revolutionary period. I think we'll end it there. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. This is the Against the Stream podcast. Please tune in again next Thursday at 3 p.m. London time, where we will go through world events and analyze them from a Marxist, communist perspective. Thank you very much.